Good evening, everyone. I'm Betsy Fischer-Martin, the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and welcome to another installment of our virtual series, Women on Wednesdays. To those of you new to one of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute in AU's School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership. And we offer academic and practical campaign training and facilitate research and discussions like this on women in politics. So the 2018 midterms brought 36 new women House members to Washington, and one of them was a 31-year-old first-time Democratic candidate who managed to flip a California seat, beating a two-term Republican incumbent. She was the first woman to hold the seat in that district and the first openly LGBTQ woman to be elected to Congress from California. And as I'm sure most of you know, less than a year later, Katie Hill resigned her seat in Congress after a scandal that really began a conversation about cyber exploitation, double standards, domestic abuse, and of course, workplace power dynamics. But tonight we are pleased to have Katie Hill join us to talk about literally the next chapter in her life. She outlines this in a new book, She Will Rise, Becoming a Warrior in the Battle for True Equality. And Katie, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we start, I want to let everybody know that we're going to save time for questions at the end. So if you do have a question, please look at the bottom of your screen for the Ask the Question prompt, and you can type a question in there. You can also upvote other people's questions that you're interested in. And there's also a green button you'll see at the bottom of your screen, too, that you can click for a link to order a copy of Katie's book. And if you miss any of the discussion or you want to share it with friends, the replay of this entire hour will be available just a few minutes afterwards at the same link that you used to register. So with that, Katie, welcome.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
So I mentioned this next chapter for you, and you start the book by outlining what you see as your calling for this stage in your life. Tell us what that is and why you decided to write a book about it.
Sure. I mean, so for me, my life has taken a lot of different kind of veers that were unexpected. I wasn't planning on getting into politics in the first place.
Right.
I was working in the nonprofit sector, doing advocacy work and working on the front lines to address the homelessness and affordable housing issues. So when I went into politics, I think that I really dug into that mission, and I thought that we have to address these systemic barriers that are in place. But it was a natural progression for me in terms of the work that I was already doing. It tied so much into it. So when suddenly everything goes, that entire path stopped, I had to really evaluate, what does that mean for me? And I just saw with such clarity from while I was serving, but the way that, the issues played out, and particularly with my resignation and everything I learned about other women, what they've gone through, that I felt such a strong need to help to close the gender gap and do exactly what the Institute is working on, and so that's really kind of the purpose of outlining the book. It was a way for me to sort of articulate that, to talk about how I think what it's going to take for us to address systemic inequality for women, and how the ultimate answer has to be that we need to get parity. We need to get equal numbers of women in office, and that's where it starts.
You talk a lot about some of the factors, the major factors on why that is, why we're still sort of falling short of that equality. Can you go through a couple of those with us and give us your sense of them and how, you propose to, get rid of some of them, change some of them, and progress onward?
Sure. So the book is structured in a way that, it covers my personal story to a certain extent, but it's really centered around the battles that we face. I talk about the battle for money, which is a huge part. We've talked about that a lot more since I've at least heard it elevated since Ruth Bader Ginsburg has passed away, because she made it possible for women she was a huge part of making it possible for women to get financing and credit on their own.
Right.
Here it is. We still have, the studies show that women get worse interest rates when they apply as single women. They are denied for credit more frequently. Of course, there's the pay gap, and there are these arguments. I basically kind of go through the arguments that you hear on the right about how there's not really a pay gap. And what kind of leads to that. And so, all of these different things are interconnected. So there's the battle for money, there's the battle for the workplace, there's the battle for safety, which is, sexual safety, but also, safety in our homes in terms of domestic violence. And then, the way that we need to address each of those, there are solutions that exist that we know and have been proven to work in local jurisdictions and in other countries, but that we have not had the political will, particularly in the Senate, to actually make it through. These are solutions that have even passed in the House multiple times, but haven't made it through in the current Senate. And so, my argument is that we have to flip the Senate, and we need to get to parity. We need to have equal numbers of women in all different forms of government across the board.
You mentioned the financial component of it. And when we're specifically talking about women running for office, fundraising certainly has been a big battle. And, you talk about this in the book, women having a harder time than men to raising money. What can we do about that? And how, in your experience running, how did you try to overcome some of those obstacles?
Well, what I've noticed in particular, and, again, research backs this up. Women are socialized to not want to ask for money, to not even want to talk about money. We just don't, that's not part of, what we've been taught is socially acceptable or polite.
Right.
And so, when you have to campaign, and I'm sure you talk about this a lot in your classes, when you have to campaign, fundraising is probably the number one job that you have. I mean, you have to go out there and everything, but without money to try and reach nearly 1 million people, when you're talking about your constituents, it takes resources. And in a market like the Los Angeles media market, it's just insanely expensive.
Right? Yeah.
So, you have to basically be able to just say to somebody, listen, if you care about this race, I need you to invest in it. We need, and that just comes so naturally for men. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee there's a headquarters where people do call time. Call time is, for those who don't know it already, is when you are just literally calling and asking for money. So I would sit there, I would do my call time, and I would listen to the men and the women, my colleagues, doing the call time, and just how different the conversations were. You would hear the guys be like, hey, what's up? This is the situation. Okay, can I count on you for $2,700 or $5,400 or whatever? Right. And the women, you would hear them talk about their, hey, how are you? How are the kids?
5 hours later, right?
Wanted to let you know about all of this stuff. And then, I don't want to bother you about it, but like, it would really help me out if maybe you could do you think maybe $500? And these are the same people. And it creates this total disparity. But there's also, even when, we don't have the science to kind of tell exactly what pitch was given and how donors respond. But what we do know is that historically, at least 2018 has kind of upended things a bit, but historically, women donors, women who are in the same kind of types of races, whether it's women or men who are, these large donors, they give like 30% less to female candidates than they do to male candidates. So there's something really wrong there. And I think that, for us to level the playing field, we need to talk about campaign finance reform. We need to make it more feasible for women to be able to come from regular backgrounds, for anyone to come from a regular background where you're not dependent on having these massive connections with wealthy people to be able to run for office. Right. And so, everything is just really interwoven in this complex web of factors that kind of compound to create these disparities. And, we really have to break it down. And that's what the book is trying to do, is to kind of break it down in the various different ways that lead to it, and how we can address it.
We also hear a lot about sort of the confidence gap, and you talk a bit about that in your book, and how you can sort of overcome that. And you were one that you say you certainly weren't shy or didn't have the confidence, but it's difficult to put yourself out there. And in your case, you hadn't run for office before. You were actually looking for someone else to run and talk to people, and basically they said, well, why don't you do it?
Yeah. And then I think part of what gave me more confidence was honestly looking at some of the men who were running and be like, well, if they think they can do it, why couldn't I? You know what I mean? There's nothing inherently better about them than me and or any women. But it's, we always, it's a joke, and I know that it's not just within my circles, but you just talk about, if only we could have the confidence of a mediocre white man.
Yeah.
And it's true. They think that they can do and are entitled to things that, it's such a stretch for so many women to even, visualize themselves in.
You also write about quote unquote shadow sexism getting in the way of equality. What do you mean by that?
So I mean that this isn't sexism today in many cases is not as overt as saying, you're a woman, therefore we're going to pay you 25% less than a man, or we're going to fire you because you're pregnant. It's often in these more subtle ways. It happens, sort of in the shadows. It happens by these pay inequities that are. It's not necessarily because a woman is a woman, but it ultimately comes down to it. For example, it's based when you're basing a starting salary on a salary history, which is very frequently the case unless reforms are put in place. Then women literally start from the moment they leave college, they start with a pay gap. And so if you're talking about that over years and years and years, by the time you get to my age, you have an entire work history. You've missed out on thousands and thousands of dollars. And it just puts you as a woman behind where you would be if you were a man and you started at, for example, 10% more just in your entry-level job right out of college. So it's that. It's also, it's the rates that we see of sexual assault. It's the fact that, there's still this perception that women are unable to make choices for themselves. And, this is a heightened debate that we're having, or, conversation that we're going to be having. I don't even think it's a debate at this point. But around, what's at stake because of the Supreme Court. And I think that, that's another piece that I talk about a lot in the book. It's just that, it's not that long ago that women were having to have back alley abortions, and we're faced with this scary possibility of getting to that point again.
You also talk about, in regards to women running and winning in office, that we as women should actually vote for a female candidate because they're a woman, right? And you didn't see that in your race early on at all. Talk about, what you're saying. You said in the book, I'm saying right here that we should vote for women, vote for women. And then you have in capital letters, gasp, because they are women. Well, why the gasp there?
Yeah, that's what I ran into all the time. And I still, you still see it.
Yeah.
When you come up against something, you hear a lot of women say, well, you get into this whole, well, it shouldn't be about identity politics, or I'm not going to vote for a woman because she's a woman. I mean, it'd be great if we had more women, but I can't just do it just because she's a woman. And I just take issue with that, because the fact is, for thousands of years, we've been putting men in power because they are men. And that is the qualifier, right? So for me, it's going to take that level of intentionality. It's going to take us in saying we want women for the purpose of representation, for the purpose of truly prioritizing the interests and the life experiences that we as half of the population have, and that we have not been properly represented, that have not been properly represented for so long. So it's going to take a lot of catching up to do. I'm not saying that if you have someone who is diametrically opposed from your ideological beliefs, that's a woman, and you've got a man who's running against her who is within your, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that when you're given the opportunity, that there's a guy that is, he's on these side of the issues and a woman's on this side of the issues. And it's just, you're looking at it and you're saying well, who do I like more? There's a lot of internalized sexism that is around who do I like more? And it's about us, who we visualize in power. And so I'm really kind of asking people and challenging people to take a second glance at it and say, you know what, we need to get more women in there, and I'm going to vote for her because she's a woman.
Because you write about your experience that you found that sort of when you were running, women were, you write the most disparaging about your appearance or your voice, or said it was going to hard to get support. They were the most critical of you. That must have been difficult.
Yeah, it was. It was something that actually really shocked me when I broke down the poll numbers, and I'm campaigning before that even, and during it, and now I've gotten way into polling. I think that it's something that's absolutely fascinating, and breaking down the crosstabs in the subgroups of people, how it's not, you can't just look at something as oh, women vote in these, in these ways, but you break it down by age and you look at
education, so many factors, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so what we found was that women, particularly women over the age of 55, and actually even more specifically between the ages of 55 and 75, were very, very difficult to persuade to support me in particular. I don't know that that's, that translates across the board.
Yeah.
But there's something that was there. And I just, those were the same age, that was the same age group of women who were the ones who were saying, you shouldn't wear this, you shouldn't wear that, you shouldn't talk this way, you should, I talk about this, and this is the example I give in the book, but who say, your eyebrows need to be drawn on better, and stuff like that. And it's just, I think some of it comes from a good place, but some of it comes from this truly internalized sexism that we need to look at.
But then you're now overly conscious about your eyebrows.
I am, yeah. And I turn up, I put on my eyebrows before I came into this.
But that sort of thing sticks with you, right?
It does, yeah. And I think that, as I see myself now, I'm not even the newest generation of leadership, right? There's people coming that are much younger than me. And I think about when I'm asked for advice or even when people ask me for advice, I want to be really conscious of what I might say and how that can impact them for the long term. And if I'm right, you know what I mean? If I'm saying something that is historically, this is the way it should be versus what it really should be,
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
You also write in there about not letting the experience that you had, some concern that it might deter other young women from getting involved in politics. And you say, very frankly, I refuse to let my experience deter others. So talk a little bit about what happened to you and how you sort of, when you're talking to other young women who want to run for office that may say, you know what, it's too risky, it's too nasty, it's not something I want to do. What do you say to them?
Yeah, well, so, what happened with me is that my, my ex-husband, I left him in, shortly after I had been elected. It's been a long time coming. It was one that basically it took me getting elected to Congress to feel like I had the power to even be able to leave that relationship. But when I had tried to leave before, he told me that he would ruin me if I did. And sure enough, a few months after I left him, he released naked pictures of me that were taken without my consent and certainly released without my consent, that he had shopped around to local conservatives, my political enemies within the district, and that had made their way into the right-wing media. And, with the most intimate details of your life and parts of you, physical parts of you that should never have been exposed without your consent. And I think, I've had to think a lot about this. And even since I wrote the book, my thought process on it has evolved some, because I wrote, I finished that in, I guess, April, which was only five months after my resignation. But I think that I in a lot of ways, I wish that it wasn't that, on the surface, it looks like I resigned because of my naked pictures being released, right? And it's so much more complicated than that. But I don't want the message to be taken away that, if somebody does something like this to you, that you need to hide. And that's a big part of the reason that I decided to come back and be a public face again, even though it would have been much easier to disappear and to go do something else or to just take some time off and hide for a while. But when I am talking about this with other women, when they say, well, what do you do to prevent it? I'm like, I don't have an answer for you on how to prevent it. I think as a society, we need to really be saying that this isn't an acceptable way. This is, there need to be consequences for cyber exploitation. There needs to be, that cannot be a norm that we accept within the media. And I know that the media, mainstream media, is different from right-wing outlets, but I also think that for us as women, there is an inherent risk that you do take on. It's a sacrifice and it's a possibility of everything coming out and these really vicious things happening to you, but that it's worth it, and that it is a sacrifice that we're asking you to make. And that I think the more that you can armor yourself, the more that you can steel yourself for that possibility, and the more that you can take ownership of it and just say that, this is what it is. This is who I am. There's a big part of me that I think I wish I had been able to do more And I think honestly, in that moment, I, coming out of the relationship and everything like that, and the complications with the fact that I had a relationship that I shouldn't have had, it just complicated things, right? But I don't want that to be something that women feel like if your naked pictures are released without your consent, that's something you should hide away from. It's not on you.
And you write about that the phrase that most people use to describe this kind of abuse is revenge porn, right? Mm-hmm. And that, you've come out and said, no, it's not that, right? It's cyber exploitation, and we have to recognize that. Yeah, and revenge porn is, and to be honest with you, I didn't even know better, right? Yeah. I didn't even know about the term until I started looking into it more, and I ended up working with an attorney and everything, and with advocates who had been working on this issue for a lot longer. But the truth is, the term revenge porn has this connotation of revenge, meaning, implying that the person who it's happening to deserves some kind of revenge, or that the person who's doing it is avenging something, right? And then pornography it's a form of entertainment. It can be done, and it's fine if it's done consensually, but when it's not consensual, it is not meant for anyone else's entertainment or enjoyment, or consumption at all. And so we shouldn't even conflate the terms. We need to see it as a form of sexual abuse. And that's why the experts refer to it as cyber exploitation. And I'd like to see that become more of a mainstream terminology for it. You said some of your thinking has evolved since you've written the book, and you basically say in the book that you don't regret resigning at all. Is that anything that's changed for you, or do you still come down on that was the right thing to do? I think it was definitely the right thing to do in the moment, right? It was the choice that I made. It was what I felt I needed to do then. But there have been many times since, and I'll tell you, one of the hardest times was when the Republican won my seat in a special election, right? When I thought maybe that wasn't the right thing, and I don't know. I don't know that there's ever a right answer for it. I do know that, I'm looking at the stuff that my colleagues are doing, and I have sort of two parts of my mind. One where I'm thinking there's stuff that I could be doing. There are ways that I could be making an impact, and I know that I was effective in my role. But there are other parts of it where I'm just like, God, it's hard to feel myself wanting to go back into that kind of space, and especially after everything. I mean, I'm still dealing with trauma. I'm the first to admit that, right? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point I would say it was the right thing or the wrong thing. I don't think I can make that kind of determination. And I would say that that's part of the ongoing kind of evolution of my feelings around it all. What were you at the time? Why did you decide that the best course of action would be just to resign? Because you were encouraged by you write about a conversation you had with Nancy Pelosi where she was encouraging to you not to have to leave. Yeah. So I think that there's such a huge part of it that had to do with my personal relationship and the years of abuse that I'd been dealing with. And, that's why I tried to really kind of reflect on that in the book. But when I left that, and then suddenly, the person who you finally had escaped from was using on a national stage these images and this other way of kind of exerting control over your life, it just totally sucks you back into that form of abuse. And it's on a much bigger stage at this point. And it's a way that it was done in a way where, they were saying that there were just articles after articles after articles. And the local people said that there was a file of 700 different, or there was a drive of 700 different files that he'd given them that I had no idea what they were. I didn't know if they were pictures. I didn't know if they were, other screenshots of text that could be taken out of context. I had no idea. And so it felt like something that just wouldn't stop. That was the part that I think there was no light at the end of the tunnel for me. And I felt like I was a liability to that I was certainly putting undue responsibility on my colleagues to have to defend me, especially those who were other freshmen in these tough seats. I felt like, I felt like I don't want to be the person who is claiming that the rules don't apply to me, right? That the power dynamics shouldn't apply to me because of X, Y, and Z. And but that was really hard. That was really hard to kind of, and still is something that I grapple with of what was,
what's the right amount of penance, or what are we asking for people to be able to, who can say, yes, I've made a mistake. I know that I shouldn't have done that. I'm trying to make, to make it right. But how do we find that space, not just as a society, but as an individual? I'm trying to figure that out. So it was all of that in a very short period of time, in a time when I was dealing with major suicidal thoughts and with, coming out of my own relationship, that I just felt like I couldn't keep going.
But you were able to really summon, the courage to go out and make a floor speech, your departing floor speech. And you write, I put on my battle uniform, and you said in the speech at the end of it, you said, we will not stand down. We will not be broken. We will not be silenced. We will rise, and we will make tomorrow better than today. I yield the balance of my time for now, but not forever.
Yeah.
So that must have been extremely difficult to make that speech.
Oh yeah. That was one where I knew I had to do it. And this was something I talked about with my staff.
Yeah.
And my, people, my advisors, my family. I didn't need to go back and do a speech, right? It would have been just fine to say I'm resigning. I didn't even need to do the video. I could have just put out a statement.
Right.
But I felt like it was really important to me, for everything that I had put into this, for everything that so many other people had put into this. I felt like I needed to show that it wasn't for nothing, that it was, even though I was stepping away, I wasn't going to give up the fight altogether. And that's why I feel like I feel a particularly strong need to double down and invest myself in really empowering other women and uplifting other women who can take the mantle, can take up the mantle, can take up the fight as elected officials and other positions of power. And I'm finding my voice. I'm figuring out the ways that I'm going to be able to make an impact through the organization that I started, Her Time,
right?
But also, in other capacities. And I just don't know yet how that's going to fully manifest. But I know that I'm not okay with just going away. Right. So, but yeah, I will tell you that took a lot. That was a very, very, it was one of the harder things that I've had to ever muster up to do.
So you mentioned Her Time, which is your PAC. So you had, when you left, you actually had a lot of campaign funds left. Was it like $1 million?
Yep.
And you could save that money for a future run, right? Or you can use it now to advocate or to donate to other candidates. And tell us about what you're doing with that and the formation of Her Time and what you're seeking to do through that PAC. Yeah.
So I, again, like you said, you could, and many people kind of keep this on the table.
Right.
For example, Daryl Issa he left his seat. And then he's now running in another seat to come back, and there's a decent chance he might win. So you can always keep your money and hold it in case you do want to run again. And that's
like Kirsten Gillibrand used a lot of her leftover money to run for president.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Sinema did with her congressional money to run for Senate. And but I felt like people did not donate to me for a future run. They donated to me for this particular race in this particular moment. And I wanted to turn that into something that could have an impact still. And in now, right, have an immediate impact. And I wanted to, so I converted it into a super PAC called Her Time. And we're still fundraising into it. So we've been spending money on candidates. We're endorsing both up and down the ballot. The highest races that we've done are Senate races, but we've gone all the way down to state legislature and even county supervisor races to really focus on how can we support women who need especially that early initial boost to kind of give them the credibility and give them the kind of launching pad to be able to kind of, break through these initial barriers that we're talking about around fundraising and everything else.
Right.
Right now, because of the immediate need around, this election, we've continued to endorse and to financially support races where I probably, we're not these seed investors, right? For Sarah Gideon or for,
the bigger,
the other, but it's still, we want to be able to support and add, the financial resources, but also the I have a great mailing list because mine was one of the most high profile races in the entire country in 2018. And so to try and build on that, to fundraise for other women and to,
right.
One of the things we're doing now that I'm really excited about is we're polling to really try to zero in on what is it that mobilizes young women as voters. We know that overwhelmingly women under 40, just like I was talking about earlier with the polling, women under 40 are overwhelmingly liberal leaning. They might not call themselves Democrats, and they may not consistently vote.
Right.
But what is it? What's it going to take? What are the messages that we really need to kind of hone in on to be able to mobilize that group to support other women for the long term? So we're hoping that will be done. It's in the field now, or it's about to go into the field this weekend. And it's focusing on battlegrounds districts in Texas. And I think that'll give us some really interesting results, and hopefully that can be useful for, other campaigns and candidates, and it'll inform some of the resources that we decide to spend in this final stretch leading up to November.
It's interesting you said that because talking about confidence, we did a poll a couple of months ago for our Gender on the Ballot project to talk about women and political participation. And we talked to women about why they participate, but we also talked to some women about why they don't participate more in politics. Yeah. And one of the reasons, and one of the reasons that came back that was very different from male counterparts, was that they didn't feel that they knew enough about politics. And we went back, because one of the questions we had also asked was, how much news are you watching about politics? They watch the same amount, they consume the same amount of news as men. Yet there's this huge disparity in just the confidence to actually participate.
Isn't that fascinating? I know.
If younger women just don't feel that they know enough, they don't have the confidence enough to.
I know. And that's something that I think, I don't have the answer for, right? Yeah. And I think the answer is probably going to be more likely to come from academia than it is from, my PAC. So I'm hoping that I can support more on the direct to campaign side. Yeah. But I really hope that there's a focus on what is it? What do we need to do in terms of addressing that confidence? I mean, that's a fake barrier, or not. Right. I shouldn't say it's not a
legitimate barrier. It's not. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think we've got to figure that out. And I hope that, we could, the fact that you're even pointing that out, and the fact that that's, that information is coming to light is really important. And I hope that we talk more about that.
Yeah, we're going to take some questions, everybody, in just a few minutes. But I also wanted to ask you about this double standard, speaking of men and women, that you write about in the book, and how it's so different when things happen, women being held to this higher standard. Certainly some of the things that happened to you have happened to other people that are still, as you point out, sitting comfortably in Congress in terms of, the relationship that you had with the staffer. Talk about that double standard, and are we ever going to see an end to that?
Yeah, there are people in Congress who have now married their staffers, and you know what I mean. That's not just an isolated situation. That's a few. So I think that I can't say whether if in this particular moment with Me Too and with the way that we've elevated these issues, that if I were a man, I wouldn't have felt the same pressure to resign. It's very possible that it would have. But I also think that because of that exact same, confidence gap or the feeling that we even need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, I don't think that most men feel the need, right? They might have gotten just as much pressure to resign, but I don't think they would have felt that same internal battle of, should I do this because of my sort of obligation to be a face for this movement, right?
Right.
I don't know. I think that we just see that play out in so many different ways constantly, the double standard for women. And it's something that, we just have to tackle head on. We need to call it out when we see it. It comes out. We saw it during the vice presidential selection process, how women were described during the campaigning, the primary campaign on the Democratic side altogether.
Right.
I think it's just, we have to look at, if we're describing something, if we're describing a flaw for a woman or something like that, we have to kind of ask ourselves, if she were a man, would we do the same thing? Yeah. And that goes for both women and men.
And we saw too in that, this sort of, pre-vice presidential pick, atmosphere that was going on with all of the candidates being talked about and some being
too ambitious,
right? Which is, the very definition of being in politics is someone who is ambitious.
Yeah, right. And no one ever would have said that about a vice presidential pick if he was a man. I mean, that's kind of the point, right? You want somebody who's willing to step up to be president.
Right. Or Susan Biden, my other favorite was that she cursed too much, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm a bad example of that. I've been able to let loose since I'm out of office, but I still get a hard time about that. Yeah. Sometimes even from my mom.
Yeah, exactly. That's what mothers are for. Okay, let's see. We have a couple of questions, so let me go through some of those. One of them is, did you feel sexism while you were running for office before the situation that developed with your ex-husband? So when you were actually...
Yeah, absolutely. I had very specifically high-level men who were, high up in terms of local Democratic politics, who said, I don't think a woman can beat Steve Knight. So you should support the guy who was the one who had run previously. And you heard that over and over again. You heard it from voters. You heard it from donors. I just don't know if a woman's going to be able to. Look at what happened to Hillary Clinton. And, you felt it on so many different levels. Same kinds of things, right? I was often accused of being too mean to my opponent. And I never even issued negative attacks. And it was just, it's just these wildly different expectations of women, because we are, by the very fact that we're stepping into these positions of power, that we are asking for consideration to be an elected official. We're stepping out of the bounds, out of the norms of what have been, expected of women for so long. And so I think it's going to inherently make some people uncomfortable. But the more we do it, the more we normalize it, and the more that we can, again, continue to call out when things are unequal.
Great. Here's a question from Isabel. She says, can you tell us more about what encouraged and inspired you to run for office and how you knew it was the right time in your life to do that?
Yeah. Well, my the right time in my life, I don't think there was a right time, right?
It never is a perfect time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could pick a right time ever, but when 2016 happened, when Donald Trump won, I felt that so much of what I'd worked for, so much of what I dedicated my career towards, and what I held dear was in jeopardy. And I knew that the only check that we were going to be able to have on Donald Trump was going to come from the next election, the 2018 congressional election. And so I decided I wanted to get involved. And when that started, when I said I wanted to get involved, I was not planning on doing so as a candidate. I was planning on just figuring out a way to volunteer for a race or, something, because it was my home district. I found out that my district was one of the top districts in the entire country that should be able to flip. And so then I started looking at, who was likely to run. No one had jumped in yet. So who was likely to run? It was the guy who had run previously and lost, even though Hillary Clinton had won our district. And I was just frustrated. We have to do, this isn't what's going to win in this district. I know what it's going to take to win in this district. I know what people here care about. And finally, I complained enough about it, and I got enough people encouraged me to consider running myself. And I said, what do we have to lose at this point? I found out. But I think that what inspired me was just this feeling of needing to do something and feeling like, you evaluate it and where's my skill set, my capacity, the fact that I didn't have, I had a job where I was able to, I'd saved enough as a young person to be able to do this. And, things lined up. But I don't think that, I think it's a very personal thing when you feel like there's that right moment, a door opens. And I would just say that when you see that door, don't second guess, just go and you'll figure it out.
But you had been involved a lot in the community. You were working with a homeless organization, is that right? Yep. And so you were sort of saw firsthand a lot of problems in the area and the community, and you got to know a lot of people through that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew how everything the systemic barriers that were in place around income inequality and healthcare, access to healthcare, and support systems and housing costs, and all of this was not just something that could be addressed by an organization or even a local community. It had to be on a much bigger scale, and that was really just brought into such sharp focus when it felt hopeless when you had a Republican House and Senate and Donald Trump that were not only going to not make progress on the things that I thought were important, and that I saw the direct impacts of us failing as a society on, but we were going to get worse.
Okay, here's a question from Caitlin. She says, what surprised you most about being on the Hill, especially after the 2018 wave that ushered in so many new women representatives? You were actually roommates with Lauren Underwood, right? Who was also elected.
Yeah. Yes, that was great. She's awesome. She's just such a good person. One of my biggest surprises, there were a lot constantly, but one of my biggest surprises was honestly how seriously we were taken from the outset by more senior members of Congress.
Interesting.
And I think that speaks to, the moment, the historical moment of our campaigns, and of, how we swept in these races and the new generation of leaders that were coming in. But we had a great deal of power as a class of 60 people who came in 2018, who were overwhelmingly younger. We brought the age down of a member of Congress. I can't remember, but it was by over 10 years, if I remember right. Just by our class getting there, we brought down the average age by over 10 years. And so we had these opportunities. We had a voice. And I don't know that everyone felt that way, but since I was elected as the freshman representative to leadership, I certainly did. And, I fought every day to make sure that our voices were heard. But I think that, I expected that really to be a battle where, I figured that the old guard was going to not want us, and they were going to say, take your place in the back. And that just wasn't the case. I found that senior members all the time wanted to help us, to elevate us, to, kind of see us as the ones who were coming up to, ultimately take the lead.
There was some drama when you all came in, though, about sort of the speaker and whether she was going to be the speaker. And then some had promised that they weren't going to support her for speaker, and then ultimately did. And you talk about Pelosi a bit in the book. And tell us about her just as a leader. And I know you had a good relationship with her, and how receptive she was to you guys, and how you worked through any of those issues.
Yeah. First of all, before I was involved personally in politics, when as a informed consumer of politics, and even as a liberal Democrat, I had a kind of a negative opinion of her just because of the way that she'd been portrayed in the media. Yeah. And I thought of her as she's the old guard. It's the old way of doing things. We need new, fresh voices. But then I got to know her over the course of the campaign, and you got to see her and all of the the knowledge and the sophisticated way of thinking, and just how we needed that leadership to be able to. There has to be a transitional kind of moment. Like I think that most members of Congress who have been there for a long time know that they're not going to be there forever, and that there has to be a transition to the next ones.
Right.
But she was really, I think, did a great job. And in no case prior to our class have I even heard about freshmen, getting the positions on committees like we did, and getting the opportunities that we did. I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, that's interesting. Just because we hear so much about her, and I know, you all worked closely together. Let's see. Here's another question from Isabel. She says, which up and coming candidates are you most excited about in the upcoming November elections? I know you mentioned you were actually supporting a couple of them.
Oh, supporting a bunch of them. So the Texas races are ones that I think are just really, really important for us to be watching. There are these battleground seats. One of the candidates, her name is Candace Valenzuela. She'd be the first Afro-Latina. She experienced homelessness. She was a single mom. She was on the school board. She's just this amazing candidate. Really excited about her. Gina Ortiz-Jones. Yeah. She ran. She had a really close race last time, and this time I think she can take it. young women and people of color, I think, are really the ones that I'm incredibly excited about this time around. And I hope that we just see more and more of that in future elections.
That's great. Here's a question about what's next for you in your professional ambitions.
I'm honestly still figuring that out. I get asked that all the time, and by my own friends and family, and I'm like, I'm not totally sure yet. By writing the book, I was able to kind of figure out that helped me in terms of organizing my thoughts around exactly the issues that I wanted to focus on with her time, and kind of the way that I saw that. So that advocacy, I absolutely see. I want to continue with that. I want to grow the PAC. We started it, late in the cycle of a presidential year, so we didn't have the opportunity to really build up campaigns from the very beginning. This time, we're going to be heading into the 2022 midterms, and if we, like I hope, win the Senate and the White House, then we have so much to protect in 2022, and that's when if you remember, Democrats had in 2008 we had the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and then we lost it. We lost it all in 2010. And I think that where I definitely see myself being involved is in trying to protect that, and for 2022, and exactly how I'm not yet exactly how outside of the PAC I'm not yet sure.
Do you think you'll run again for another public office?
I'm not going to say never. I have certainly not written it off, but I really do think that there are, and I think that our class in a lot of ways opened the doors in terms of helping people realize that they could run. And there are so many women out there that I think should, and that have the expertise and the strength and the courage to run. And I don't feel like I need to be the one to step back into that spot. When I can boost others right now. So, I don't know that means forever, but right now I feel like my role can be more, I wouldn't even say behind the scenes, because I'm happy to be a loud voice, but I don't think I need to be in the seat
of running. You mentioned RBG a little earlier. What impact do you think this open Supreme Court seat, her passing, she's just revered by so many young women, the outpouring of affection that we've seen certainly down at the Supreme Court, just a phenomenon, right? Add to that the political culture that's going on now with this, whether the open seat, whether it will be filled. What impact do you see all that having on the election?
The thing that I hope that it has is that it mobilizes people, right? I don't think that swing voters are going to be moved by it, really. I don't think that, but I think it's a basic energizing issue. And now this is the closest that we've ever come in my lifetime towards losing rights that have been, that we've taken for granted. And we've even seen the Supreme Court that has had a conservative majority now for quite some time. Well, I don't even know how long, but long enough that they've chipped away at civil rights, that they've granted rights to corporations over people, Citizens United. So I think that I'm hopeful that people see the stakes, people of our generation, and particularly women, see the stakes at play. And maybe if they weren't planning on voting, or they weren't necessarily planning on, talking to their friends about it, that this is going to make them do that. And I had a really interesting conversation with my friend yesterday. She's in Colorado, and, she was devastated by RBG dying and everything. And so I told her, she's like, well, what can I do? And I said, you are in a swing state. You're in one that we have a great opportunity to pick up a Senate seat in. And, any of your friends that are roughly your age, or who may not vote, who might consider themselves independent, like, this is your chance to say, are you registered? Do you have a plan to vote? How are you going to vote? And really be active in trying to just talk to your own personal circle about it. And that, if everyone does that, if everyone who is now, suddenly realizing the stakes because of RBG's death, if they are, you don't have to go out and cold call people, right? You can do it with your own circle, and just make sure that there's not a single person in your own circle who is not voting, or who doesn't know how they're going to vote.
And that is one of the upsides of sort of this internet culture that brings so much negativity, can also be used as a way to communicate with others in your circle, right?
Yep. But pick up the phone. That's one thing you learn in politics, is that a text message or a DM or a tweet is not the same as picking up the phone and calling them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question. This is from Bridget. She said, what advice do you have for young women who are looking for a career in politics and governing?
There's so many things. I think the biggest advice that I would give is to really work on that confidence piece, right? Get to it, even if you're thinking about it right now, that's actually a huge first step. But I would say, we're really good at figuring out what it is that we're bad at, but we're not always good at figuring out and elevating what we're good at. And if you want to run for politics, if you want to be in politics at all, you have to become the best bragger that exists. And so really trying to kind of talk to yourself and have those, that internal dialogue about, what, I am really good at this. I am, but also being able to recognize, like, this is where I need to learn more. For example, have you ever fundraised before? If you haven't, then, start working with a nonprofit or get involved with an organization that's going to require you to pick up those skill sets. And, just kind of preparing yourself for everything that comes with it. That's a piece that I didn't do because it was sort of it was a, I don't know, I don't want to say impulsive, but kind of decision to run in the first place. So if you're thinking about it, then I would say you have a great opportunity to really kind of, to make yourself as strong, as capable and as confident as possible before you decide to step in. And so that when that moment happens, when there is that door, you say, ready. Yes, I am the one.
Well, you mentioned in your book also some of the campaign training programs, and WPI, we run one called We Lead that actually your friend Lauren Underwood is a graduate of, but there's a lot, and ours is a nonpartisan one, but there are lots of ones also that the parties run that are campaign training. And then, like you said, get you ready that when the timing is right, you can jump in.
Exactly.
So before we go, I want to let everybody know about a couple more of our upcoming Women on Wednesdays coming up. Next week, we have Stephanie Shriak and Christina Reynolds with Emily's List. They have co-written a new book together, Run to Win, Lessons in Leadership for Women Changing the World. So they will be here next Wednesday with us. And then we have Women on Thursday that week, because the vice presidential debate is on Wednesday night. So on Thursday, we are going to convene an analysis panel about the debate, of course, with Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, with Candy Crowley, who was the first woman to moderate a presidential debate in 2012, Democratic strategist Karen Finney, and Casey Hunt, who covers Capitol Hill for NBC. And then we're going to do a panel on the next Wednesday, October 14th, about one of the things that we were just talking about, young women. We're calling it Gender and Generation, because we're going to talk about young women voters and the older voters over the age of 50, with Nancy Lamond from the AARP, and then Ann Moses with Ignite, who works on younger generation turnout and advocacy, and then Melissa Deckman, who is a professor of political science at Washington College. So they'll be here on the 14th. So we invite you to join us for that. And Katie, thank you really so much for joining us for a great conversation. Congratulations on the book, and good luck with the campaigns over the next few weeks.
I was looking at those and I was like, oh, there are things for me to get into. So thank you so much for what you do.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.